Russia is reportedly preparing a large-scale retaliatory attack on Ukraine after the real consequences of Operation Pautina, carried out by the Security Service of Ukraine last week, became known. In the United States of America, it is believed that the threat from dictator Putin to retaliate against Ukraine for last week's drone attack has not yet been fully and seriously carried out. And most likely it will be a significant multi-target strike on the government quarter in Kyiv or on Security Service of Ukraine facilities throughout the territory of Ukraine. At least that's what we are being told today. This is reported by the publication, warning that allegedly both American intelligence and many Western officials are saying that Russia is currently really preparing some massive strikes against Ukraine. In order not to spread unnecessary panic, let's figure out this situation together. What exactly are sources in the West telling us, and what do we actually know about the real consequences of Ukraine's attacks on airfields in Russia as part of Operation Web? And why are the Americans now trying to de-escalate the situation as much as possible and hinting that it's necessary to return to negotiations in Istanbul? Let's calmly and rationally sort all this out. My name is Alexei Pechi. Before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, leave a like, write any comment under this episode, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There, we publish breaking news as soon as it comes in. Let's go through everything step by step. So today, the reputable Reuters writes that the United States of America believes that the threat by Russian President Vladimir Putin to retaliate against Ukraine for last week's drone attack has not yet been carried out seriously, and most likely it will be a significant multi-target strike. This was stated by United States officials. The timeline for a full Russian response, let's put that word in quotes, is unclear. One source said it is expected within a few days. A second American official said the response will likely include various types of air capabilities, including missile and drone strikes. Let me make a brief remark right away and say that further in the text we will often see this, that Russia, in response, will strike Ukraine. Let me reinforce my point once again. Russia cannot deliver any response. Because Russia is the original source of this aggression, Russia is the aggressor. Accordingly, all actions carried out by Ukraine are a responsive, forced retaliatory reaction. Everything that Russia does is not a retaliatory reaction. It is an act of aggression. Because if we exclude from this equation the very fact of Russia's large-scale attack on Ukraine in 2014 and then the full-scale invasion in 2022, there would not have been any attacks by Ukraine on Russian territory at all. A priori, we wouldn't even be discussing any of this right now. That's why it's absolutely propaganda rhetoric when they claim that Russia is preparing something in response to an attack by Ukraine. Thus, we are simply blurring the line between the aggressor and the victim, putting Ukraine and Russia on the same level. It's merely two countries in conflict reacting to one another's moves. No, Russia is the aggressor. Russia is the origin of this war. Ukraine is responding, forced to respond to acts of aggression in order to protect its population. Russia's actions are aggressive, not responsive. Let's move on. He goes on to write that United States officials do not specify Russia's expected targets and do not go into intelligence matters. The first official said that Moscow's attack would be asymmetric, meaning that its approach and targets would not mirror Ukraine's strike on Russian military aircraft. Last week, Russia began an intense missile and drone attack on the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. On Friday, the Russian Ministry of Defense stated that the strike on military and military-related targets was a response to what it called Ukrainian terrorist attacks against Russia. However, United States officials believe that a full Russian response is still ahead. A Western diplomatic source said that although Russia's response may have already begun, it is likely to intensify by striking symbolic Ukrainian targets, such as government buildings, in an attempt to send a clear signal to Kyiv. Another high-ranking Western diplomat predicted further devastating advances by Moscow and stated, quote, "It will be massive, brutal, and merciless." But Ukrainians are brave people. Next, he quotes Michael Kaufman. He is a Russia expert at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He says that he expects Moscow might try to punish the Ukrainian Internal Security Agency, that is, the Security Service of Ukraine, for its role in last week's attack. To send a message, Russia might use medium-range ballistic missiles to attack security service of Ukraine facilities. Here is a quote from Kaufman. Most likely, they will try to strike back at the security service of Ukraine headquarters or other buildings of regional intelligence offices. Russia might also strike Ukrainian defense production centers. Nevertheless, the same Kaufman suggests that Russia's ability to retaliate may be limited, since it is already directing a significant part of its military power toward Ukraine. Overall, Kaufman says that Russia's ability to significantly increase its strikes compared to what it is already doing and has been trying to do over the past month is very, very limited. And here I completely agree with him. That is, apart from increasing the number of missiles and drones that Russia launches at Ukraine, it can't do anything more. Here, I'll briefly remind you that Kyiv claims that 117 drones were used in the daring Sunday attack launched from deep within Russian territory during an operation codenamed Web. And now we move on to evaluating this operation. Today, a new assessment has appeared which refers to both Ukrainian and Western sources, and even to some extent to Russians, insiders from there. And here they write that this was an irreversible blow. Ukraine delivered a powerful strike on Russia's strategic air bases thousands of kilometers from the front, using hundreds of drones and forcing the Kremlin to downplay the scale of its losses. According to the publication, based on satellite intelligence and NATO assessments, between 10 and 13 Russian aircraft were completely destroyed, and up to 40 more were damaged. Attention, that is, according to satellite intelligence and NATO assessments, up to 13 were destroyed and about 40 were damaged. At the same time, the Ukrainian Security Service claims that 41 aircraft were hit, about half of which were completely destroyed and the other half damaged. NATO's estimates are even higher. According to analysts, the figure provided by NATO officials most accurately matches what can be observed in high-resolution satellite images. At the Belaya Air Base in the Irkutsk region, 6 aircraft were destroyed, including strategic bombers Tu-95 and Tu-22, which are actively used for missile strikes against Ukraine. At Olenye Base, this is actually the far north. Satellites recorded traces of fires and debris from 4 more bombers. Ukraine also reports 2 aircraft were destroyed. Of 50, however, the video only partially confirms this information. At the same time, Russian authorities deny the statements made by Ukraine and Western officials. Deputy Defense Minister of the Russian Federation, Sergei Ryabkov, called the information about the destruction of the aircraft exaggerated and the operation itself a terrorist act. Moscow propagandists downplay the losses to 8 aircraft while not providing any evidence at all. Russian propagandist Sergei Markov admitted that the strike was strong, but claims that it will not have military significance, adding that Ukraine is allegedly exaggerating the consequences of the attack. I'll note that we're not exaggerating. In fact, we're downplaying it to some degree. Because according to NATO estimates, even more aircraft were damaged and destroyed than the assessment given by the Security Service of Ukraine. That's also telling. Well, against this background, United States Secretary Marco Rubio, during a conversation with French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot, stated the importance of continuing peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. This was reported by United States State Department Press Secretary Tammy Brias. And here are her words. Rubio emphasized the importance of continuing direct negotiations between Russia and Ukraine to achieve lasting peace. Here is a big question for Mark Rubio. What is there to talk about with the Russians? The Russians claim that Ukraine supposedly withdrew from the negotiations when it struck Russian airfield's dictator. Putin speaks and says, how can we talk to the Ukrainians after this? We are all leaving these negotiations. The Russians brought insane ultimatums to the Istanbul negotiations, even when there were no strikes. If you haven't heard, I recommend you go back to my channel and watch the previous episodes. That's where I talked about those ultimatum conditions that Russia is putting forward. And it's not just about giving up 4 Ukrainian regions plus the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, not just about refusing to join NATO. No, there are points saying that Ukraine must officially give up all reparations. Ukraine must ask its allies to have all sanctions against Russia completely lifted down to zero. Ukraine must agree to restore diplomatic and economic relations with Russia. Ukraine must agree that, for example, the gas transportation system and oil pipelines that pass through Ukrainian territory must continue to transport Russian oil and gas to Europe. And so on and so on. This is complete nonsense. Russians say, let's pretend that nothing happened to you. We're just taking away part of your territory. We destroyed your country and now we're forbidding you from joining any military blocs or alliances. You give up everything, and that's it. And after that, it's as if we're brotherly nations who can somehow coexist with each other. So, basically, these are the kinds of negotiators we're supposed to have some sort of talks with. But, friends, I'll just leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like if you want to support the work of this channel.